Omar checks his credit score the way he checks the weather. Quick glance. Once a month. Out of habit more than actual concern. The app loads. Big green letters. Good. Score 702. He feels that small, familiar hit of relief and closes the app. Here's what Omar doesn't see in that moment. Somewhere else in the country, someone else is applying for the exact same auto loan, at the exact same dealership, on the exact same day, with a score of 760. Both of their apps say good. Both of their apps show the same reassuring green label. One of them is about to pay meaningfully more in interest over the life of that loan than the other, for the entire duration of the loan, and neither one of them will ever see the word that actually explains why. Here's the part nobody tells you when your app shows a friendly green good and calls it a day. That label was designed to be encouraging. It was not designed to tell you where the real cutoffs sit, the ones lenders actually use to decide your rate, and there's a meaningful gap between good enough to get approved and good enough to get the best rate available. A gap most people never learn exists until they're already sitting across from a loan officer. This isn't a video telling you your credit score doesn't matter, or that you need to obsess over it. It's a video about the specific, quiet illusion built into that green label and what it's actually costing people who trust it a little too much. Let me show you the math. My name is Alex, and I spend a genuinely unreasonable amount of time looking at where people's money quietly vanishes to. If you've ever seen good on a credit app and just accepted that as the finish line, hit subscribe, because today on Wealth Adjacent, we're taking apart the label that convinced an entire generation to stop paying attention exactly when it mattered most. Before we go further, a quick disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't financial advice. And credit scoring involves factors specific to your own history that a general video can't account for. What I am here to do is explain the actual structure lenders use, so good stops feeling like a finish line and starts feeling like the accurate midpoint it actually is. Let's introduce someone. Omar, early 30s, works in marketing, has had a credit card for about 8 years, pays it off in full every month, never missed a payment. He is, by almost any reasonable definition, financially responsible. He checked his score exactly once when he first got the card, saw it climb into good territory a couple years later, and has treated that as mission accomplished ever since. Let's start with the number, because it is genuinely a little unhinged. Most consumer credit apps use a simplified labeling system, typically something like poor, fair, good, very good, and exceptional, mapped onto broad score ranges. The good range on most of these apps commonly spans something like 670 to 739, a full 69-point window, all painted the exact same shade of reassuring green. Let me say that again. A person at 670 and a person at 739 get the identical label, the identical color, the identical little checkmark icon, despite being separated by a gap that in the eyes of an actual lender is enormous. Where does the disconnect actually come from? Consumer-facing apps prioritize a label that's simple, encouraging, and easy to understand at a glance, because that's genuinely good for engagement and genuinely good for helping people feel motivated rather than discouraged. Lenders, on the other hand, use far more granular internal pricing tiers, often broken into much narrower bands, where every additional 20 or 30 points can shift you into a materially better interest rate bracket. The app's job is to make you feel informed. The lender's job is to price risk as precisely as their data allows. Those are two different goals, wearing the same 3-digit number. And here's the part that should make you sit up. On a typical auto loan, the difference in interest rate between someone at the low end of good and someone at the high end of good can commonly run several percentage points, not because one of them did anything wrong, but because the lender's actual pricing tiers cut directly through the middle of that single green label. Over the full term of a 5 or 6 year auto loan, that rate gap alone can add up to well over $1,000 in extra interest, sometimes considerably more depending on the loan size, for two people who both proudly show the exact same word on their phone screen. But the label itself isn't the trap. A simplified label is just a simplified label, and it exists for genuinely good reasons. Here's where it becomes a trap. A significant share of people who reach the good tier report they stop actively monitoring or improving their score at that point, treating it as a completed goal rather than a range with real internal variation. And the genuinely uncomfortable stat sitting right next to it, a notable share of people who applied for a major loan while sitting in the lower half of good say they were surprised by the interest rate they were offered, specifically because they'd assumed good meant they'd already secured favorable terms. Read that twice. People are walking into major financial decisions with real dollar consequences, confident because of a color, without ever checking where they actually sit inside that color. Back to Omar. He's currently at 702, comfortably inside good, and he's been treating that as settled for 2 years. If he applies for a mortgage at that exact score without addressing it further, he'd likely land in a materially different rate bracket than if he pushed just under 40 points higher into the next tier up. A gap that, on a typical 30-year mortgage, can translate into tens of thousands of dollars in additional interest paid over the life of the loan. He hasn't done anything wrong. He simply never learned that good wasn't the actual target. It was just the point where the app stopped nagging him. He is not the exception. Most people sitting in the middle of the good range have never actually checked what specific interest rate bracket that puts them in with a real lender, and the overwhelming majority assume the label itself is the relevant piece of information rather than the specific number underneath it. Now, here's the part that turns this from a scoring problem into a psychology problem. And this is the part that should genuinely fascinate you once you see it clearly. Behavioral scientists call this satisficing, the tendency to stop optimizing the moment a goal is technically met, even when meaningfully more value is available just past that point. Humans are remarkably good at treating a labeled threshold as a finish line, especially when the label itself is designed to feel like an accomplishment. Good doesn't just describe your score. It tells your brain the task is done, which is precisely the moment most people's attention moves somewhere else entirely. A researcher studying threshold effects in decision-making found something almost too honest. Once people cross into a category labeled positively, their motivation to improve further drops sharply. Even when the actual underlying difference between just barely good and comfortably good carries real, measurable consequences. The label does the emotional work. The number underneath it quietly stops getting checked. And then there's the specific mechanism that makes this particular illusion so persistent. Credit score apps are built to be checked casually and infrequently. A quick glance, a color, a mood boost, then closed. They're not built to walk you through what a specific lender in a specific situation would actually offer you at your specific number. That gap between quick glance app and actual lending decision is exactly where the illusion lives. Because nothing in the casual checking experience ever forces you to confront the more precise, less comforting version of the number. Now, before we go further, we still haven't gotten to the specific factors people misjudge within their own credit profile while they're busy staring at the headline number. Hold that thought, because first, the smaller leaks. Let's talk about the phrase that should trigger alarm bells the moment it shows up in your own head. My score is good, so I'm fine. Credit utilization, the percentage of your available credit you're actually using at any given moment, gets radically underweighted by people focused purely on the headline score, even though it's one of the more responsive factors and one of the easiest to improve quickly. Someone can have a perfectly respectable score while carrying utilization high enough to be quietly working against them every single billing cycle. Then there's the age of accounts factor, which people tend to either completely ignore or badly misunderstand. Closing an old credit card, even one you never use, can shorten your average account age and nudge your score in the wrong direction, a move plenty of people make specifically because they think simplifying their credit is automatically a responsible decision, when it can quietly work against the exact number they're trying to protect. There's a timing version of this pattern too, specifically around hard inquiries. Applying for several new credit lines in a short window, even for genuinely reasonable purposes, clusters inquiries together in a way that can meaningfully affect your score right before the moment you actually need it to look its best. Which is precisely when people tend to be shopping around for financing on something big and inadvertently doing the one thing most likely to work against them. And then, the layer that matters most and gets checked least, the specific rate tiers your actual likely lender uses, which vary by lender, by loan type, and by the current lending environment, and which are never displayed on the simplified consumer app at all. The app tells you good. It does not tell you what good actually converts to at the specific bank, credit union, or dealership you're about to sit down with. There's a joint application version of this that catches a lot of couples off guard specifically. When two people apply together, for a mortgage especially, lenders commonly price the loan based on the lower of the two scores, not an average, not the higher number. Two people can each individually feel great about their own good label and still end up with a rate priced off whichever one of them sits lower in that range, a detail that rarely gets explained until the paperwork is already in front of them. Checking your specific number matters even more when someone else's number is about to get averaged into a decision that neither of you fully controls. There's also a credit mix factor worth naming briefly: the variety of account types someone has. Credit cards, an auto loan, maybe a student loan, which contributes to the score in a smaller but real way. People sitting comfortably in good, with only one type of account, sometimes assume adding variety would meaningfully boost them, when in most cases the utilization and payment history factors matter considerably more, and chasing credit mix, specifically by opening unnecessary new accounts, tends to do more harm than good, once inquiries and average account age are factored back in. Alright, here's the section nobody wants anywhere near a calculator when a green good label just showed up on a phone screen. Let's do this through Omar, because abstract numbers slide right off the brain. Say Omar spends the next 6 months paying down utilization and letting his oldest accounts continue aging without opening or closing anything, and moves from 702 into the low 740s, comfortably into the next tier up. On a typical mortgage in that higher bracket, the rate difference alone, compounded over 30 years, can easily represent tens of thousands of dollars in interest saved for the exact same loan, the exact same house, the only difference being which side of an invisible internal cutoff his score landed on. Here's the framework I want you to carry around. Your credit score label tells you the category. It does not tell you your position inside that category. And for anything involving a major loan, your position inside the category is worth actual money. Before signing anything significant, the real question was never, is my score good? It's, where do I sit inside good? And what does that specific position actually get me? And now here's where it gets almost cruel. If the simplified label reliably predicted the best available rate, you could stop there and trust it completely. It doesn't, reliably. Research comparing self-reported score satisfaction against actual loan terms received finds a meaningful share of people significantly overestimate how favorable their terms will be, specifically because the label they were shown gave them no signal about where inside that label they actually sat. Now, let me keep my promise, because I am not telling anyone they need to obsessively chase a perfect score. I can already hear the objections, because I get them every time I make a video like this. First, but at some point, isn't more optimization just not worth the effort? Fair point, and often true. Once you're solidly into the higher tiers, the marginal benefit of squeezing out a few more points does shrink, and there's a real point of diminishing returns. But notice the actual question worth asking honestly. Are you at that point of diminishing returns, or are you sitting in the lower half of good, where the next tier up still carries a meaningfully different rate? Second, but checking my score too often will hurt it. That's a common misconception worth correcting directly. Checking your own score through most consumer apps and services is a soft inquiry and does not affect your score at all. It's only certain lender-initiated hard inquiries during an actual application that carry any impact. The actual answer was never obsess over every point. It's know specifically where you sit before a decision that actually cost money depends on it. There's a third point worth naming honestly too. The specific number you see on a free consumer app isn't always the exact number a given lender will actually pull, since there are multiple scoring models in use, and different lenders sometimes rely on different versions for different loan types. That's not a reason to distrust the general picture your app gives you. The broad range is usually a reasonably close estimate, but it is a reason to treat the number as a strong approximation rather than the literal figure a specific underwriter will see, especially right before a decision where a few points genuinely matter. So here's the framework I'd actually use. I call it the pre-application check, and you can run it in about 15 minutes before any major loan decision. Before applying for a mortgage, auto loan, or any large financing, check your actual score, not just the label, the specific number. Research the general rate tiers for that specific loan type from a couple of real lenders, which are often published or can be requested directly. Compare your specific number against those specific tiers, not against the vague good label. And if you're sitting near the bottom of a range with a meaningful tier just above you, consider whether a few months of targeted improvement, paying down utilization specifically, is worth the wait before applying. A few practical moves fall out of that. Keep utilization low, ideally well under a third of your available credit, in the months leading up to any major application, since this factor responds faster than almost anything else. Leave old unused accounts open rather than closing them, specifically to protect your average account age. Cluster any necessary credit applications as tightly together as possible if you must apply for more than one, rather than spreading them out and racking up separate inquiries. And check your specific number, not just the color, every time a major financial decision is on the horizon. So here's where we land. The credit score illusion isn't a story about anyone being careless or uninformed in some broad sense. It's a story about a label genuinely designed to be encouraging, doing exactly what it was built to do, while quietly failing to communicate the one piece of information that actually determines what a real lender will offer you. The data doesn't say credit scores don't matter. What it says is quieter and far more useful. Knowing your specific position inside your tier, right before a decision that actually costs money, depends on it, tends to be worth far more than simply knowing you've crossed into a reassuring color. And if you're Omar right now, looking at that same green good label and feeling that same familiar relief, hear this clearly. You're not careless and you're not uninformed. You trusted a label that was specifically designed to feel like an accomplishment, because in most everyday contexts, it genuinely is one. Of course, it felt like the finish line. Seeing that it's actually the midpoint is most of the battle. So Omar spends the next several months paying down utilization and leaving his accounts alone, checks his specific number again before applying for anything major, and treats good as useful context instead of a completed goal. His score climbs, quietly, without him closing a single account or applying for anything new, just from finally paying attention to the number underneath the label. Check your specific position before the decision that actually costs money depends on it. Skip the false comfort of a color that was never built to price alone, and revisit that number specifically, not casually, the next time something big is actually on the line. And the next time your app shows you a friendly green good, remember, that label was built to make you feel informed, not to tell you exactly where you stand. If this helped, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, did you know there was this much variation hiding inside a single credit score label? I'll see you in the next one.